Welcome to Cover Book Beat. I'm your host, Roger Nichols. Our guest today is a man who walks in two worlds. Larry Freeland is a child of the military. His grandfather served in World War I. His father was in the Air Force. He himself graduated high school on an Air Force base in Puerto Rico and served in the 101st Airborne in Vietnam as an infantry officer and a CH-47 Chinook pilot. He is the recipient of Distinguished Flying Cross with 1 Oak Leaf Cluster and Air Medal with 10 Oak Leaf Clusters, the Bronze Star, and various other military service medals. But he also served in the world of finance with several degrees in the field, long-term service in the banking industry, and later as a consultant and a teacher. Reaching retirement, he turned to writing. His first novel, Chariots in the Sky, was published in 2021 to wide acclaim. And he's come out with his second book, The Patriarch. It's the first in a Legend of Honor trilogy set to span 3 generations of a family military service in the 20th century. It is a big, utterly absorbing novel, and we're very pleased to welcome Larry Freeland.
Thank you, Roger. I appreciate being here and look forward to talking with you.
Were you always going to be an author somehow, or is that something that just arrived from some incident or series of incidents?
I had no, if you go back 5 years in my life and somebody said, you're going to be writing books down the road, I'd look at them like they were nuts. No, it came out of nowhere. It did have a gestation that goes back probably into the mid 90s. I can digress a second and give you some background. Back when I came back from Vietnam, I just forgot about everything associated with the war. And I'm a big movie buff. In the late 80s, we saw a movie called Platoon by Oliver Stone. And I thought that was a pretty good movie. I thought he went over the top a little bit, but it reawoken some things from my days as a pilot. And I thought, it ought to be a good idea if he could maybe do a movie about helicopter pilots, because that was dedicated to the guys on the ground, the grunts. And so I wrote him a letter a couple months after that, a query letter saying, hey, I understand you might be doing another movie, maybe even 2. You thought about a helicopter aspect. And he wrote me back a couple months after that. Said, no, he said, I've already got 2 in the works, and 3, I've got another idea. But, from what you've told me, it sounds like a great idea. Maybe you want to hook up with somebody and write a book or write a screenplay and see what will come of it. And, well, I thought that was great that I heard from him. He gave me some ideas, some contacts, the whole bit. I kind of set it aside. About a year later, I said, I'm going to give it a shot. So I did some research and ended up writing a screenplay here in Atlanta in 1992, and submitted it to a screen contest here in the Southeast. Got honorable mention, and I thought, well, I'm going to get picked up, and we're on our way. Didn't happen, but everybody that read that screenplay over a long period of time said, Larry, you really need to turn it into a book. And I'm a big movie guy. My wife's a reader. And so I was tired of it. I put it all away. And back in 2018, I thought, that story's still burning in my head, and I'm not getting any younger. So I decided to pull all that stuff out and see maybe write a book. Of course, COVID comes along in January of 2020. So I come up here to my office, shut the door, and I just started writing. And I came up with Chariots and put it out there, and it's done really well. And my publisher said, well, you got any other ideas? I said, well, yeah, actually I do. I'm thinking of writing a trilogy that follows one American family for 3 generations that serve in our wars and conflicts. And he said, that sounds like a pretty good idea. He said, why don't you come up with a macro memo on that and start working on the first draft manuscript? I said, okay, so did both. And of course, now we've produced and published book 1 in that. Legacy of Honor of the Patriarch. So I fell into this at the back end of my life, and I never would have thought of this as something I'd have done. In my banking career, I did a lot of writing, but not creative writing. It was all business writing.
Well, I have to tell you, I've interviewed more than 800 authors. You're the first that has had a movie director tell them to write a book. That's a classic. I love that indeed. Talk about the research you did, because it's obvious and it really informs the depth and quality of the book. How long did it take you, and where did you go to research?
For Legacy of Honor, book 1, it's all about World War I And about 2 decades after that, where the main character, Sam McCormick, and tries to adjust. A combination of things. I'm a big history buff. I love history, particularly American history, and kind of concentrated on a lot of our, if you will, wars. Not that I'm a war guy, but just central to our history. We always seem to be in some conflict or some war, and there's a lot of drama associated with that kind of writing, war genres. And so I just thought that I would pursue that 3 generations and start with World War I. Now, where did I get all my background? Combination. I'm a movie buff. I've seen movies. I've read a lot of books about World War I. My grandfather was a doughboy in World War I, which is an infantryman. And he and I were real close growing up. My father was 30 years in the Air Force, and particularly in his younger days, my younger days, he was gone more than he was home. And when in the fifth grade, my fifth grade year, he was stationed in Greenland with the Air Force, unaccompanied, of course, 13 months. So he put us next door to his parents, my grandparents, in Louisville, Ohio, a little town outside of Canton. And Granddad was a big man. He worked in the steel mill his whole life. I mean, he was just a real impressive fellow. He served in World War I, doughboy in the trenches. He loved to play poker and drink a little bit. And in Louisville, he was had a group of guys. There's 8 or 9 of them, and they all served together. Well, they didn't serve together, but they all served in the trenches in World War I, and they were good friends, and they loved to play poker. And once a month, they would meet on a Saturday night and play poker all night, and play above the firehouse and the police station in the little courthouse downtown. And Granddad would take me with him occasionally, and we'd have dinner, and then we'd walk down. It was only a couple blocks from his house. And I got to know all the guys, and they'd let me watch them until I got tired, and I'd lay on the couch and watch the telly a little bit, eat their food and drink their Cokes and pass out. Well, many times when that would happen, it'd be later into the morning because they'd play all night. And 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, I might wake up, and my back would be to them laying on the couch, but I could hear them talking and sharing their stories from World War I. So some of what I got for this book was memories of some of their conversation. I mean, I was old enough to, kind of grasp a little bit of it. Of course, then when I got older and I did my own tour, not that it was the same thing, but still, if you're in a fight, there's some realities there that I could relate to. So I drew a little bit on theirs. Granddad never talked about his experiences. He only shared 2 stories with me. They're both quite humorous, and I embedded them in the book. And then my father knew a little bit about his history. And then out on YouTube and the internet, you can find a lot of stuff out there. Yeah. So I did a lot of research, and I had some history that I carried with me, and all kind of mingled together. And it took me over a year to write what you've read, that book. I wanted to make it as accurate. It's historical fiction set in history that's factual. And the characters are all fictional, but I drew on the main character. I drew to some extent on my grandfather, and kind of built him around that character, Sam McCormick, and then just kind of ran from there. But I wanted to make it historical, so if the reader would go through the book and enjoy it, I wanted to accomplish a couple things. One, at some point they would identify with Sam and almost become Sam, because I really put him in the trenches. As if you've read the book, a lot of people read it, come back and say, I couldn't wait to get out of the trenches. That was pretty rough. And then the second half of the book basically deals with how he assimilates back into society and deals with all their issues. And that's all based in historical fact, because a lot of people, and myself included, I never heard of the Bonus Army or the Bonus Army March in 1932, or the Little Steel Strike. I've heard about strikes and all that, but some of the violence associated with those steel strikes, of course, there's strikes in general in the 20s and 30s can get violent around the country, but it seemed like the veterans always bore the brunt. And in the Great Depression, a lot of them bore the brunt of the Great Depression. They had a hard time finding work when they came back. They had a hard time keeping their jobs. A lot of them were dealing with health issues. they call it shell shock back then, but
Yeah.
1 million men served in World War One, and a lot of them in the trenches. They didn't stay up there the whole time. Then they'd bring them in the trenches for a while, put them back, and put another unit in it. But the last major battle of the war, the Argonne, which is in the book, lasted about 3 months, and that was the biggest battle the Americans fought in as an entire unit. We've had 2 American armies dedicated to the Argonne. Over 1 million men fought in that battle, and it ended virtually on Armistice Day, November 11th. And a lot of men were killed and wounded in that. But anyway, so these fellows come back and they're dealing with health issues, gas, respiratory. My grandfather had respiratory issues his whole life, digestive, the water, the living in the trenches was almost tantamount to living in a sewer or next to a sewer. So they came back with a lot of issues, and there was no VA. They didn't know how to handle these fellas. They were kind of on their own. So there was a lot of issues they put up with, and then trying to assimilate back. I was trying to capture all that. That's part of the purpose for writing this trilogy, is to help people to read it and get maybe a little better appreciation for our history and what men and women who served went through, not only when they were in the service, but what they had to do to adjust when they came back. Go ahead.
I appreciate that, because a lot of books about war end when the war ends. They come home and they marry their sweetheart, and it's all, rose-colored cottages and whatnot. But this talks about the aftermath, which is important, maybe more important, on assimilating back into society. There was no GI Bill for the World War I vets, and the bonuses didn't get paid for what, till 43 or something? I mean, come on. I'm glad they finally did that.
Yeah, that's kind of that's a lot of sadness there, but this is kind of sad to me that in 1919, after the war ended, Congress passed the bonus for World War I veterans. It was over 4 million of them. And their criteria was based on a lot of things: wounds, service, rank, so on and so forth. But in their infinite wisdom, they said, we'll pay these bonuses in 1945. Now, this was 1919, and these fellas, a lot of them probably wouldn't make it to 1945.
Yeah.
Where when the Great Depression hit in the late 20s and into the 30s, a lot of these fellows were impacted with their families, and they wanted the Congress to expedite that and give them their bonus to help them out. They wouldn't do it, so they formed the bonus army over a period of several months, and then they didn't march. They all just a lot of them arrived in Washington, and they set up encampments there in Washington, D.C., where they approached the different congressmen trying to get them to act. And at its peak, they had over 12,000 veterans there. A lot of them, well, not a lot, but some of them brought their families and so on. And it went on, and it didn't go anywhere. And the president finally said, order the army to run them out. And they ran them out in one day. And it was just, it was horrendous what they did. And the irony of that is, you had General MacArthur that all these men fought under if they were in the what was called the Rainbow Division, which my granddad was in. And of course, Patton was a big officer in World War I, and he had to command the cavalry that ran them out of Washington with tanks. And then there was Eisenhower was a major, and he was an aide to MacArthur. And there's video where the two of them are standing there while the army's marching through and tear gassing them and clubbing them and all this stuff to get them to clear these areas. So it's a very sad point in our history. But I digress. But that was kind of shocking to me and other things. So I tried to capture all that.
And that, I think that's one of the real values of it. There are other books about the life in the trenches, but I will have to tell you, there were times I had to put the book down and just walk away for a second because of the image, because there's a partnership between the author and the reader, and you create that common shared experience. And some of those are pretty ugly and brutal, but it felt so real. That's the job of an expert writer. And I will say that some writers call attention, look how cool a writer I am. Your copy is so transparent, you go through it and become the character.
Well, I appreciate that. That's what I tried to capture, and I did that in my first book, according to most people that read it. And in the reviews and the comments I'm getting from this one, it's the same thing. I want to carry that through my next 2 books.
How far are you along with book 2 at this point?
Well, that's a good question. I turned over the manuscript last week to my publisher.
All right. So we know there's always a lag in there, but we can look forward to that before too long.
Yeah, we don't have a date yet. I'd like to see it get out sometime this summer.
Mhm.
It's a long process for writers. The editing process goes on for a while. The book cover, the design, and then when it comes all together and we're satisfied, it goes. It's prepared. And what we've done for my first book in the trilogy is prepare a ARC, an advanced reader copy, and we send it out to several folks and some entities to get reviews that we can use up front before we release it to help market a little bit and see if we make sure we haven't really missed anything or something is really glaring. So that takes about 45 days to get everybody's feedback that we send out to. So we're looking at late summer at the latest, I hope. I'm excited about it. It's all, book 2 is called I changed it from the Sun to the Air Warrior. So it's the
Oh,
Legacy of Honor, the Air Warrior. And from the end of book 1, Sam's son, Sean, is just enumered with aviation.
yeah.
Book 2, he, as my dad, 30 years in the Air Force, World War II was the Army Air Corps, then changed over in late 40s. He's pilot, and he'll go to Europe, fly out with the 8th Air Force out of England. He'll meet some legendary people. He'll be mentored throughout this book, off and on, by Curtis LeMay, General LeMay,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
who was a colonel back then. And in real life, my dad knew him, and they were friends.
Wow.
So I pull him in there, and he'll meet some other folks. He'll meet Jimmy Stewart briefly. He'll meet Glenn Miller. My dad was a big ballroom dancer. He loved Glenn Miller. Of course, he was killed over there
Yeah.
in December of '44. And Jimmy Stewart was a B-24 pilot, flew 24 missions, liberators over Europe, and he had a distinguished record. Never talked about it. Never would let anybody make a movie about it, but he was quite a man.
And I recall he retired as a general, if I'm not
He did.
mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah, and he flew all the bombers. He was in SAC the whole time, and he flew all the bombers.
Yeah.
Qualified to do it. So he even flew a mission over Vietnam in a B-52.
No, I did not know that bit. Oh,
He did.
sweet.
Yeah, it's incredible when you start doing research what you find. It's
Yeah.
just,
Which
anyway.
that remind I have a whole category of as I read, I take notes. I've got about 8 typed pages of notes, which we can't go through all of them. But I do want one category of stuff that intrigued me, stuff I didn't know about that you told me about.
Okay.
I love when you send me to the internet to do more research because I'm intrigued. Finding a picture of the rabbit ears binoculars, for instance, that let you look over the trench without exposing your head to enemy fire.
Yeah.
That was one of the nifty little bits. Or the fact, and this is just a basic thing that you think you'd understand, but in retrospect, it makes perfect clarity. You zigzag the trenches so that an artillery shell is limited in the blast radius and doesn't get a whole line of people if you just did a line. These are fun stuff that I appreciate knowing about now.
I know Tom Clancy, and I don't want to get down into the real nitty gritty of things. I mean, he's a tremendous writer, but a lot of his books really get into the nitty gritty of the different things, and that's good. But I wanted to touch and keep it simple, but expose the reader to as many different elements of that era as possible. And I just found that intriguing and fun. So, like, there's another term in there. I've always heard of buying the farm. Never knew where it came from, and I've embedded that in the book. It makes sense now, but I didn't know it before I researched it.
In a matter of fact, it's been used all through military. One of my favorite authors, Robert Heinlein, read a future story about space troopers, Starship Troopers, in which he talks about buying the farm.
Yeah.
And as I recall, you say that it comes from the bonus you'd get once you transfer out will give you enough, or for your life insurance policy, you bought the farm, and that paid. When you died, the money went to your heirs, and they were able to buy the farm, and so
That's correct.
That's where it came from.
Yeah, they were big on their insurance back then, and they always tried to keep the guys current because if they got killed, their family, I think it was $10,000, and it was more than enough money to buy a farm, which we were basically an agrarian country back then.
Yeah.
So a lot of these fellows came from that.
Yeah, just a marvelous. There's so much stuff. I call this a dense book, but in the best possible light. It's rich with all kinds of things. One of the lines you wrote is, "There's fire in our eyes, revenge in our hearts, and mercy has just taken the day off." Is that a feeling you had in Vietnam at some time?
A couple times.
Yeah.
You get so, I didn't see a lot of combat. I saw more than I wanted to see. But there comes a point, and I'm just speaking for myself. There comes a point when it's personal. They're trying to kill you and the men with you. Uh, you know, it just gets to a point where you want to end it quick.
Yeah.
So you take them on as best you can, and last man standing, and you want to be that last man.
That's right. There's a story about, I can't remember now where it was supposed to be out of historical figure, and it was a sheriff, and there was a bad guy coming, and he shot him in the back. And they said, "Well, why did you do that?" And he said, "Because he's dead, I'm alive, and that's how I wanted to end up." So sometimes you have to take the practical approach, I guess. Let's see what else. Oh, you also referred to, and I quote, "the panicked beast within me." That's a great phrase, and it evokes the fact that this isn't all adrenaline. This is fear as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. Fear is a great motivator to some extent, and when it comes, you know, I guess the only way I could say that is fear is present the whole time. Is how you control it. I mean, if it takes over, you're probably going to have a bad day.
Yeah.
You got to control it. Maybe the wrong word. You got to channel it, but you do have to face it. And you know, a lot of people who have read my first book, Chariots, as a helicopter pilot, say, "You guys are down there hovering and you're shooting at you, and you can't go anywhere until your troops get off or they unload your helicopter. And you got small arms fire, machine gun fire, RPGs coming at you. How did you sit there and do that? Weren't you scared?" Yeah, but what are you going to do? It was just, you know, what's your job? Well, that's kind of a cliche. You just had this mindset that you're there, you got to do what you got to do, and then you get out of there as fast as you can, and hope you're back in your little barracks or your little hut that night, having a beer or writing a letter to your family. So,
as a matter of fact, you have several letters that you quote in there, and they're really nicely done. They feel authentic to the time and the kind of phrases that people would use. Did you find some old love letters that you copied someplace?
That's a good question. I want each of these books to reflect, to the best of my ability, the time that they're written in, the dialect they might, well, the way they talked, how they acted, how they felt. And so, you know, I'm fortunate. I'm 76 years old, and so I've got a little history with fellows who going back into the 1900s, and of course World War II and forward. But I did a lot of research, if you will. Of course, again, reading some other books and things. I just wanted to capture that as best I could and do it justice. I didn't want to take modern language and put it back in the 1917 and 1980. It just wouldn't work. I want it to be historically, you know, relevant. And back then, like, you know, the guys fighting in the trenches, they would cuss, but they didn't cuss like we cussed in Vietnam. It was a whole different. I mean, so that was the way they were raised. It was the society at the time.
Yeah.
And then you got the World War II guys. They had a little more language, but they used a lot of code words, like you heard "foobar" and from
exactly snafu.
Yeah. And Korea was probably the same, but Vietnam got a little bit more, you know, more current, and the guys that are in the service now and the ladies. So, you know, I wanted to make sure I was kind of not straying too much.
Well, the fact there is a love story involved in here as well, and it's not the total being of the plot, but once it introduces, it gives you a balance and a flavor that makes the horrors of the war even worse by comparison.
I tried to capture that too. I didn't just want to write a war book, because these men, well, in my books, they're all men. There's the Patriarch, he has a son, then the son, which is Sean, has 3 sons, which will be in book 3. I wanted them to have other aspects to their lives that kind of they had to deal with and interchange a little bit or interact a little bit. It makes to me a little richer story, more realistic story.
Mhm.
Uh, so like with my grandfather in World War I, he didn't actually marry a French nurse, but when he came back, he married a French lady. My
Made it a little
grandma's French.
made it a little easier to write, no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, my grandma Freeland. Yeah, she's quite a person too. And then in the book I just wrote, my dad, when he came home in World War II, before the war ended, he got a leave in the late 40, just before D-Day. He got to come home for a couple of weeks, and I think it was 3 weeks or so. And he had an Irish girlfriend while he was over in England. Anyway, he comes back in a couple of weeks, and he was raised in Louisville, Ohio, and Canton area. And he loved ballroom dancing. He went out to Myers Lake in Canton on Saturday nights, which was back then, Friday, Saturday nights were big deals in ballroom dancing. Many major cities had ballrooms with Glenn Miller and all those characters, all those orchestras. He met my mom, his future wife there. And in book 2, that's how my character meets his future wife at the Lake Myers at the ballroom there, and they have a good time on the dance floor. And then he writes her when he goes back to war, because he's not done yet. He has to go back and fly missions until the war ends, and then he gets transferred to the Pacific to fly B-29s before that war ended. But in his letters back home, in book 2, he's always asking her to marry him, and she will never give him a commitment, which actually happened in my dad and my mom's case. So I drew a little bit on what I knew to make it a little more realistic in some respects.
So does that mean for book 3 you're going to have to split yourself into 3 people?
That's a good question, because I'm not sure I'm going to do that yet. Both book 1 and book 2 are written in what's basically the first person present, so that I try to get the reader in the guys in their mind and living through them. Book 3, I'm not sure how to do that yet. To be quite honest, I'm doing a little research on that here and getting some feedback. I've got some ideas, but it'd be very difficult to have one first person with 3 characters.
Yeah.
But all 3, me and my brothers, we all served. I was 5 years in the Army, and my middle brother was a Navy pilot, 27 and a half years. Retired as a captain. My younger brother did 2 years in the Army. When I was in Nam, he went to Korea, got out, and then he went as a special agent with the government and retired at 50, which basically they had to do back then. 9/11 happens, and he joins a private security firm and goes to Iraq for 18 months as a linguistics, explosive, and weapons expert.
Wow.
And he's out on the FOBs the whole 18 months he's there working with the infantry guys. And then he comes back and he decides to go back again after 4 months and goes back to Iraq and does the same thing again for 18 months. Comes back about 6 months and he says, no, I want to go to Afghanistan. So he goes to Afghanistan for 13 months doing the same thing. My middle brother, Tom, and I always called him a cross between Dirty Harry and Rambo, because there was just an adrenaline rush he couldn't live without, apparently. But he had quite a career in his life. So all my brothers and I all served in some capacity.
I'll bet the family reunions had great stories coming out of them.
We used to, yeah, everybody's gone but me.
Oh.
So yeah, we used to get together a lot over the years, and we didn't trade war stories. My dad never talked about his experiences. Neither of my brothers really talked much about theirs, and nor did I. Every once in a while we have a touch point, but we would talk about our service and the other guys we served with. I mean, I learned a lot about my dad's buddies and friends that served over in World War II in Korea, and I drew on those experiences to help me write book 2.
Fascinating. Kind of getting close to the end, I want to ask this one because it's always fascinating to me. What do you hope the reader will take away when they close the book?
I hope that they learn something they didn't know before and have maybe hopefully a little better appreciation for what our men and our women have gone through that have served our country, particularly in conflicts or in combat. And then when they eventually come back and try to assimilate back, what they go through. The Vietnam veteran, as a lot of people know in general, just was not treated very well. Matter of fact, they were probably the most abused veteran group we've ever had. And that's just beyond comprehension to some extent. Shouldn't happen. So I don't write this to reflect that, but I think we've done a better job of our more current veterans over the last couple of conflicts. But to give people a better appreciation of what they go through. Most of them handle it, transition back. They have their demons. And if you've ever served or if you've ever been in a conflict or combat, it never really goes away. It may dim some as you age, but it doesn't go away, and you carry it with you the rest of your life. And all veterans do. So people hopefully will have a better appreciation for that.
All right. Let's mention your website and how people can get a hold of you or find out more about your books or yourself.
My website would be Larry Freeland, all lowercase, .com. If you go to that, larryfreeland.com, you'll see some information about me. You'll see some information about both the books that are out there. I have different drop downs at my website. There's another one that has all the marketing and interviews and podcasts and articles that have been done, and some of the reviews we posted that'll give them a better understanding of what other people think of the book, and they can order it from there. There's a buy section. You hit that and it'll drop down. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, BAM, if you will, and Indie. And it's in paperback and all forms of ebook. And I'd like to encourage people to go to their local bookstores and support them. You can order it through any local bookstore. Here where I live in North Georgia, the Barnes and Noble in Cumming, which is south, carries it in their store, and another independent bookstore about 40 miles from here is carrying it in their community. But you can go to any bookstore and get it.
So. All right. Well, we have to thank you for an extraordinary book, an extraordinary interview. Our guest is Larry Freeland. The book is The Patriarch, and we highly recommend it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that.